Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Young Love virtual panel. My name is Nicole, and I'll be your moderator for the panel today. This is the very first virtual event that In Bloom Bookery is doing, so we're very excited and we're grateful that you're here. Hopefully, this is the first of many, but we are really excited to get into conversation today with Paige Powers, Charlene Thomas, Racquel Marie, and Tucker Shaw. And so I want to thank you all for being here and also thank your incredible publishers, Macmillan and Scholastic, for making this possible. For all of you attending, we're going to get started with introductions in just a second. But I also wanted to let everyone who is viewing know that the Q&A is open. So if you have questions, please leave them. And towards the end of the webinar, we will ask the authors your questions. Now, enough of me talking. We're going to get to know these amazing authors. So if you could start with Paige, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your book.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Paige, and I just put out my book called And There Are Roommates. If it can show up on the screen, and probably not, that's okay. And yeah, it just came out right in time for Pride Month, so I'm very excited for it to come out. It's about a trans teen who gets stuck rooming with his ex at a boarding school who does not recognize him post-transition, and it is very dramatic.
All right, thank you, Paige. Okay, if we could move on with Charlene now.
Yes, I also had my obligatory copy of my book here, but I don't think they show up on this. So anyways, I'm Charlene. I wrote a book called It's You Every Time. It's my my first young adult romance. And it follows a girl named Sydney who's kind of had a rough go at it for a few years. She recently lost someone very close to her, and she's just sort of trying to figure out how to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And she ends up running into a very cute boy at Dunkin' one morning, and he invites her to spend the day with him. And they sort of go off on this magical New York City day together. And at the end of the night, when they are about to maybe kiss, something happens and she just sort of feels this awful pain all over her body, and she's yanked away from this very wonderful new boy that she's met, and she wakes up and it's the same day all over again. So it's very much a story about grief and healing and destiny that is in stores now.
Thank you, Charlene. Okay, Raquel.
Hello. I also have my books behind me that are not visible at all, so I won't attempt it. But I'm Racquel Marie. I've wrote a couple different YA books, and my third one, which came out last year, is This Is Me Trying. It is a YA contemporary / romance about estranged childhood best friends, Beatriz and Santiago, who have not seen each other in a little over 2 years since the funeral of their mutual best friend, who they were both in love with. So the book takes place over the course of their senior year. It is in both of their point of views as they kind of navigate their grief, mental illness, guilt, and kind of reconnecting with each other after so many years apart.
Awesome, thank you. And Tucker.
Cool. I'm going to try this too. Nope. Ghost book. Hello, I'm Tucker Shaw, and I wrote Right Beside You, which came out a few weeks ago. And it's a story of a kid who moves to New York. He's 18 years old, and he's got a kind of an overactive imagination, or a healthfully active imagination. And he encounters, he picks up a camera from his great aunt Cookie, who gives him a Polaroid because she's stuck in bed, and so she wants pictures of New York City because she's a lifelong New Yorker and she can't get out to see the city. So he brings her back Polaroids of the city, but something happens with the camera, or maybe his imagination, which takes him back in time. And he starts traveling primarily to 1930 in New York City, where he meets a boy. And it's really the story of Eddie, my main character, trying to figure out what is real, what is true, what the difference between those two things are, what love is. Can you be in love with somebody who may or may not be a time traveler, may or may not be a figment of your imagination? And meanwhile, there's another very cute boy in the present right in front of him. And how do you decide what to do when you are kind of in this wild morass of stuff? Anyway.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you all so much. Okay, so to get into the questions, the first thing that I wanted to ask you all was specifically about writing romance for young adults. I feel like YA gets sort of a bad rep sometimes. It's kind of a misunderstood genre, as is romance. So, what drew you to young adults? Like, why this age range? What about it do you love? Kind of things like that. If anyone wants to go first.
I can go first. So I'm one of those ones that's been writing forever. So like I was like writing books at 7 years old. And I always had characters that were my age until I sort of aged up to high school. And in publishing, I think we're starting to maybe potentially get a little bit better at it now, but there's sort of this weird sort of gap space that we refer to as like new adult that hasn't gotten a ton of love from the publishers themselves. So you kind of were going from YA into adult. And I was sort of in that middle range and I didn't really know how to be an adult yet. So I sort of stayed consistently writing YA for a while. And I think that for me, what really attracted me to sort of stay in the genre as long as I have is I really appreciate telling stories that I think that we don't always give teens the credit for being able to understand. I think that from the outside looking in, people will think like, oh, well, a YA book is a book for kids. And while yes, the characters in a YA book are going to be teenaged, I think that there's so many things that are going on in the world right now and that are happening in people's lives right now that it is unfair to assume that a teenage mind is incapable of processing that or doesn't deserve a safe space to process that. And I just think about myself as a teenager and how formative those years were for me and how important it was to me to lose myself in a book. And I feel it feels really cool for me to be able to know that I'm not just reaching a reader at a moment when they're that age, but I'm also reaching them at a moment that is probably going to be a very formative set of years for them. So, yeah, I think YA is very magical for that reason. And yeah, I didn't answer your romance question, but this is my first romance, so I don't know if I have a good answer for that yet.
That's perfect. I think you touched on, people thinking YA might be too juvenile, or, the topics discussed in YA aren't things that, like can't have that maturity to them because it's meant for young people. But, that's where that misunderstanding comes in, is the younger generations are filled with great minds and it's the future of the world, and are capable of so much more. So it's, I think, an important genre.
I can
Other. Okay, go ahead.
I can go.
Yeah, of course, please do.
I had kind of the funny experience of getting into YA around the time-ish that I was still in the category, at least writing it, because the first two novels I ever wrote was when I was like 17, 18, and then 19, and both of those were about people who were in like their late 20s, which is weird because I'm now there, so I don't know why I was writing that then. But my debut novel, Ophelia After All, I wrote when I was 19, and it came out when I was 23, so I kind of got to grow up with it. And I just found that I really like writing characters that are very introspective, but also that their emotions are kind of incredibly high stakes. And I think the teenage years have these kind of consequences to them and this immediacy to them that you don't have in the exact same way at different periods of your life. And so I really enjoyed reading books that validated that experience of these interpersonal conflicts with your friends and with your family and at school, those being like worth a narrative. And so it was fun for me reading those growing up and feeling validated about the things I was going through in my life being like worth a story. But then also when I started writing it myself, getting to write these types of stories with characters who were more similar to me, being queer and being Latina, that was just a even more exciting thing, getting to contribute to the same feeling I had when I was younger, but for other people who are now growing up. So yeah, I just think getting to write characters that are particularly messy and let their emotions kind of drive their actions, and it's understandable and super realistic for them, is a very fun place to operate if you want to be writing so specifically about characters and their relationships with each other.
Yeah, I think this is kind of reverse of what Rocky and Charlene has said, but my books are not introspective and they don't have any crossover appeal to adults. There are plenty of adults who read my books, but they know they're visiting. Um, and for people who look down upon YA because it's for kids, okay. Like some media should be for kids. And I think one of the hardest things you can do is make a kid like you, make a kid think you're cool, want to spend time reading a book that you wrote, even though you're an adult. So if you're able to pull that off, I feel like that is a huge feat. And that should be celebrated. I think having, that gap space of what Charlene is writing, the YA to adult is so important. But I also think another area that's underrepresented is the middle grade to YA awkwardness. Like my characters are 15 and they're sophomores, I think, but there's also some freshmen in the book, and that's also really hard to come across in a weird sort of way. It feels like you kind of have to be like a junior or a senior to be traditional YA. So yeah, there's a lot of places that I think still need more voices and more authors. So if that's a space you're looking to get into, it's a good spot.
Yeah, for me, it's I echo a lot of what everybody's already said, but like I think that time of life is so rich and so complicated and so textured and so interesting and um so like when I was a teenager, I thought deeper thoughts than I've ever thought since I was a teenager. Do you know what I mean? Like you really go for it. The stakes really are high emotionally when you are young. And to me, that's just a really interesting thing to write about. And when you talk to people who aren't writers or aren't producing fiction or even spending a lot of time professionally thinking about that period, people always talk about their youth because I think that it's a time of life that is so formative. You come out of it with victories and failures and regrets and they're just so, not that you necessarily want to relive them. I definitely don't want to be a teenager again. It was great, but no thanks. But in terms of characters and experiences, yeah, I mean, I, sometimes I even wonder what YA actually means, because like, yeah, the characters, main characters are probably young, but like, there's so much literature in the world where that has young characters that isn't classified as YA. And YA, even the idea of teenagers is a relatively new concept culturally. And so I don't know. I also think like that I agree, Paige, there is room for media specifically for young people for sure, because to be able to show people that they are seen and celebrated and critiqued and all of the things that you want to do with a young audience, to have that opportunity is there. But I also think YA as it's a weird thing to call a genre, even because within YA there's fantasy and romance and sci-fi and like there's all these different genres within it. But I think that like the boundary around YA is really dissipating a lot more every year. And to me, that's super exciting because putting young people and grown-ups in the same conversation, I think is so interesting. And I love the idea of that. So plus it's a great audience. I mean, honestly, it's a really great audience. They're super engaged and they'll tell you when you suck. They'll tell you loudly when you suck, but they'll also really, really celebrate you when they like the work that you've done. So I appreciate that enthusiasm so much.
That's really cool. And it's really interesting to hear your insights on it too, as people who are actively in the space and seeing the changes happen. And Yeah, but Paige, you brought up just even talking about the, young adult being for kids and like there's no shame in that. I love that you said that because it is so true. There is no shame in it. And there should be media for young people. Um, and something about your main character is like, Charlie gets stuck in this crazy situation and there's so many shenanigans going on and it's really funny. And I wanted to ask you like what your favorite part about Charlie as a character is and like what did you enjoy most in writing his story?
That is a great question. For those who haven't read the book yet, and I assume it's most, if not all of you, because it just came out, the main character is Charlie and the love interest is named Jasper. And I created the love interest first rather than the main character. And this is something that my agent often tells me when trying to kind of develop a romance, regardless if it's YA or middle grade or adult. You want to make sure the two characters are kind of equal, even if it's the same POV. You want to make sure they're learning equally from each other and they kind of balance each other out. So my love interest Jasper is often compared to Howl from Howl's Moving Castle with the dramatics and the theatrics and the drama. He's a very flamboyant is too strong of a word, but he's very queer and very he's very he performs it in a very flamboyant manner. And so I had to sort of think, well, what would complement that? And in a main character, Charlie is very quiet and smart and into himself and poised. And I think Jasper might have been a bit too outlandish if I hadn't had a counterpart like that, and people would have stepped away from the book, perhaps. Some still do, and that's fine. But that was primarily what I was thinking about. It wasn't just me self-inserting or me thinking what I wanted in a main character. It was thinking about both at the same time.
That's a really good point too about the characters needing to balance themselves out. Like the dynamic between the two of them really is what, shines. And yeah. So I'm glad that it was enjoyable to write. It was enjoyable to read. Um, Again, now Racquel, I have a question for you. Speaking of POVs, with the dual POV in This Is Me Trying, dealing like the topic of grief being present in the book, seeing how both characters kind of approach the world, like already a dual POV, like each character is so different, and being able to differentiate them on the page is a process in and of itself. But like in dealing with grief and how everybody handles that so differently, how is that trying to kind of create those two separate, unique characters that felt unique through those POVs?
Yeah, so I worked on this book. I came with the idea for it when I was like 14. So it took me about 11 years to actually get it to publication. But in the process of actually writing this iteration, I had lost a lot of people in my life, and a couple of my friends had similar experiences. And when I was talking to one of my friends about it, she said something where she was like, all grief is the same and all grief is different. And I included kind of a line similar to that in the book, because I think that is it says a lot that grief is this kind of universal thing that we can all connect to, but also everyone experiences it in these very fundamentally different ways. So it's both the most relatable thing that everyone will experience and also the most private, personal thing that you can ever experience. And so I wanted to make it clear that these two characters, they lost the same person that they were both best friends with. They both had strong like friendship, platonic feelings for him, but also were both in love with him in these different ways. But that loss meant a different thing to each of them, both internally and externally. That Beatrice as a character was dating their friend Bryce when he died, and he died by suicide, which is another added element of their grief. So she was dating him when he died, and so people have a particular view of what that would be like for her, and she is in this weird situation of like, I never broke up with him, so how am I supposed to like move forward with my life? Am I a terrible person if I experience any joy when this is a thing that like I'm never moving past this? Versus Santiago as a character who was his best friend and kind of repressed feelings of being in love with him and had moved away, and they were in a huge fight when he died. So Beatrice and Santiago are coming from different point of views, of Beatrice being like the closest person in this boy's life when he died, and Santiago was like the most distant person in his life. Mm-hmm. And so for Beatrice, it's almost like she's so close to the grief and has to find a way to step away from it and continue to live her life while still kind of holding its hand and experiencing that, but knowing it doesn't have to be the only thing she has in her mind, versus Santiago has to get closer to it and acknowledge that this is a thing he's been running from. This is a thing he has refused to acknowledge. And he's going to be running from it his entire life if he doesn't find a way to like exist with it. So basically both characters are trying to find a way to exist in their life with this grief, but they're moving toward it or away from it in different directions, and their relationship with each other helps them kind of find that middle ground because they both want what's good for the other one. And this is almost answering your first question, but it was fun writing a romance between two characters where I get both of their point of views, where both characters kind of hate themselves and think that they're terrible people. And then we switch to the other point of view and that other person thinks the world of them. And so I think that's a very nice thing, particularly to write for teenagers, because if they can relate to one of those characters and think like, oh, I'm just like this person, I also think I suck. And then they see another character falling in love with them and embracing everything about them, like knowing them fully. That is a very fun, affirming thing to write and fun to get to kind of work through. So it was very interesting, and it was a challenge because it was the first book of mine I wrote in 2 POVs, and I did a lot of craft stuff that's more boring, but like it was a very fun journey trying to kind of work through how that was going to be, again, grief the same for them and also very different.
I love that. Thank you. Okay, we had a question from the chat that I wanted to ask is what authors or books influenced you all as a writer? If anyone has an answer off the top of their head and wants to go first.
Gosh, I wouldn't even know where to start. I mean, so many. And I think from any genre that you can imagine. I turned 18 in 1986, and so my teenage years were a lot of there's no gay section at the bookstore. There's no gay section at the library. There was no Pride promotion. There was stuff, but you had to really look for it. And when you found it, you would just. I remember, finding Christopher Isherwood and Ian Forster and some of these people who were writing about gay and just sort of out of the mainstream kind of like ideas of life and love, and being able to see in those books like an opportunity, like a world, like a universe in which, maybe things were complicated. Maybe the story was about being gay, or maybe the story was about sort of the complications of being gay or something. But especially in the 80s and early 90s, when obviously things were really, really tough with the gay community for obvious reasons, it felt like I just clasped onto some of these writers who, I don't know. I mean, it was obviously a very, very small group of writers, and people that had the opportunity to be published really had to fight to get there. And there was a lot of like stuff that was sort of secret and coded, and you'd really have to look for it in ways that weren't necessarily expected. But I love that, and I loved finding things like that. So I'm really inspired by the idea of something hidden. And a piece of literature, when you find the piece of literature that speaks to you in a way that people in your real life wouldn't know how to, that's always just so inspiring to me. So totally not answering your question at all, because there are so many authors that have inspired me stylistically, but also just by the nature of their own personal story and how they figured out how to get published.
That was great. I loved that. And this, now I have another follow-up question that we can jump back to the other one, but writing stories like this that are diverse and weren't as common, however many years ago, like, how does it feel to know that you're contributing stories that like people see themselves in, whether that's through a diverse identity or their relationship, or even just, coming of age on paper, and like being able to kind of recognize similar traits that they have in them. And during those formative years when young people are reading these and being like, wow, I'm not alone. I'm not the only person who feels like this, or I'm not the only person who exists like this. Like, what does it mean to you to be writing stories like that?
Is that for me?
Sure, we'll start with you.
Oh,
I'd
okay.
love to hear everyone's answer on that too.
No. To me, somebody recently asked me whether or not I thought that writing fiction counts as activism. And I have been like chewing on this question for months now, because the idea of representation, the idea of putting a lot of things into the market that would allow a reader to be able to see something reflective of themselves feels like it matters, but is it activism? I'm not sure. So I think like it's important work to do, and I think that the more, you know, it should be funny, it should be strange, it should be weird, it should be literary, it should be goofy, it should be all of those things. Like you want the full complexity of all this kind of stuff to be represented on the shelves. And so, yeah, it feels good to offer a little bit of a contribution to that overall sort of wave and tsunami and ocean of possibility there.
Love that. Thank you. Does anyone else have an answer to that they want to share?
I definitely agree, Tucker. And I think growing up, I'm a bit younger than you, but I had a similar experience where I grew up. I'm still older than Racquel. And I know nowadays in Racquel's era, they read like Hunger Games in English class and stuff. And we didn't have that. We just had the old white men. We had Of Mice and Men. I didn't know why books existed, really, the ones currently being published, until I was in college, which might sound a bit ridiculous. And I admittedly probably wasn't looking for them, but I didn't know, how do you know to look for something if you don't even know it exists? I remember literally seeing Becky Albertalli's debut, Love, Simon, when I was walking to class, and I said out loud, "We can do that." I literally remember saying that, and it was, in like the it was like 2014, 20, around there. So mostly I grew up on video games that did feel coded in a similar way, where there were, people would ship people online, and a lot of that fandom culture that was brewing in like 2011, 2012, and Tumblr, that was kind of where I was getting a lot of my inspirations. And I did see a question come up about characters also that influenced us, similar to books and such. So I think I used to be insecure about video games being my main inspiration, but I'm starting to see a lot of other authors talking about that too. Like Adam Silvera did a whole piece about how that was kind of how he started writing, and like he's just a bit of a bestseller. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways I think nowadays that we're getting inspired.
I love that. Someone asked which video games in the chat, if there was one in
Oh,
particular.
I think a lot of the very heavily story-based ones, like Final Fantasy or Kingdom Hearts, things like that. They're almost kind of like anime and manga adjacent, in my opinion, with how heavy the characterization and storylines are. So I really enjoy those.
I love that.
I can at least say I grew up reading a lot of Courtney Summers. She was publishing a lot of YA when I was in middle school, and I was honestly reading it a little too early. But that was one of those kind of authors that really influenced me to love contemporary novels. And it, not the exact same thing as Paige, but it almost was once I got to like college that I was like, oh, I can write these types of books, but they can be about characters like me, because I loved those books growing up, but they did not often feature characters that had like Latin American heritage or weren't straight. And so it is really fun for me to get to write the types of books that I would have enjoyed reading growing up, and then get to have young readers say like, this is the first time I read a book with a character as Colombian heritage or Cuban heritage, or read like a queer Latina in a YA book. And there are so many other people who are contributing to that, and it's just fun to be a part of it. Like I never want to be like the token or like the only person in the room doing something. And so it's very fun to get to grow up alongside this industry that I feel like is starting to get better and grow at it more, and that it's becoming less of a rarity is such a special thing. Like I want this, kind of what you were saying, Tucker, I want there to be an assortment of diverse stories for readers, where they don't have to be picking narratives that fit like one specific niche. And that the more people there are in these spaces, the better it is for everyone cumulatively. So it's fun to get to like play some role in that, however big or small that is for different readers.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the inspiration piece of things and sort of how and what we're reading to be inspired. For me personally, one of the best things I think about being an author is that I feel like I get to consume whatever I want and I get to call it work. So reading is super important. I think it's important beyond just as a writer, but just as like a human being to read diversely and to consume points of views that you're not as familiar with or, expose yourself to worlds and people and whatever that might not be part of your everyday surroundings. But also for me, I get a ton of inspiration from TV and from movies and from things like that. I actually watch a ton of reality television. And what I love about reality television from an author standpoint is that I think it shows me how people really talk. I think when you're looking at scripted stuff, you're sort of in a situation where it's kind of what we do, right? Like we write books and it's not necessarily what really happens and how people really express themselves. And one of the things about reality TV that I really attach to, and I see myself really like not just watching the show, but picking up on how people are moving, the words people are saying, like when they're saying, how they're interjecting, and that sort of thing. And as an author, I think that is really helpful for me in my efforts to create characters that sound real. So I think sometimes when you're like aspiring to, I don't like to say aspiring to write because if you write, you write, but when you're like aspiring maybe to be published or something, you might feel this pressure to be super well read and to like know the classics and to know all these sort of, potentially very didactic stories that have been put out over the course of the years. But I think it's just as valid to study the movies you watch and to study the TV shows you watch and stuff that might not seem like it has the same merit as sort of a giant book that was published 100 years ago. Um, so yeah, I'm just saying I like to watch TV. Is that cool?
I love that. I wouldn't have thought of reality TV as potentially like a good, study tool, but at the exact same time, you hear people watching and like going out and kind of studying how people interact with each other. Reality TV is just a little insight into that. So I love that answer. Um, we also got a question about, are there any characters in media outside of books that have inspired your writing? So I would expand that even to, have there been any like public figures maybe that you've kind of observed that have inspired characters in your stories or just your writing in general?
I always end up talking about this whenever I start talking about books, which is very funny. I love this like niche teen drama called Dance Academy. It's an Australian teen show. It's not like, it sounds like reality TV when I say that, but it's a like a just a teen drama about like characters at teenagers at a Australian ballet academy. And I loved it growing up, and I never danced. I didn't have that relatability to it. But the main character in that I identified with a lot, and I liked how realistic she was and how she was clearly a teenage character that was written for other teenagers. Kind of what Paige was talking about. Like, this is a show that was not, it was the actual teenagers were playing these teens. It was not for like 35-year-olds. This was not like repackaged like adults that are supposed to be teenagers. And I felt like the main character in that inspired me in some way to write teenagers that are allowed to be unlikable and not the conventional unlikable way. Like, I've written like Beatrice in This Is Me Trying is like an unlikable female protagonist in a more conventional sense of like, she's very mean, she's very standoffish, she doesn't want people to talk to her. But I've also written characters that are just like incredibly self-indulgent with being like really romantic and having loving like gossip and loving like niche things. And I think that those also get attributed as being like annoying or whatever. And so I I identified with that character so much, and it was very validating for me as a teenager to be like, oh, here's someone who is so incredibly embarrassing, and so like doing the wrong thing at all possible turns, but like that is what a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, 17-year-old is like in reality. And so I think that allowed me to feel more indulgent when I'm writing my books, where I'm like, yeah, there are some adult readers who are probably going to pick this up and be like, wow, this character's so immature, but there are teenagers who are going to pick this up and go, wow, this character is so much like me, and this narrative is saying it's okay that they're messy and messing up at times, because that's a part of growing up. And I think that that was a validating experience for me as a teenager that I try to replicate and worry less about like making these characters be likable in a way that feels unrealistic and inauthentic to what it's like to actually grow up and be a human for the first time.
I agree with everything you said. That's all I have to say. That was brilliant.
I love that too. Um, okay. Does anyone want to touch on that? If not, I have another question that we can move on to. Okay. The next thing I wanted to ask you all was what kind of scene is the most fun for you to write? And is there one that you've written that was your absolute favorite? That either, or even like one that kind of jumped out to you after readers got a hold of it that really stuck out to readers, and you're like, I didn't even think about that at first, but now it's has such a like a scene or a moment has a hold on readers in a way that you didn't anticipate, but maybe it now has a new meaning to you. Is that just like what do you have most fun writing? Like what has jumped out to you so far?
I right now have written across genres. So my first one is a YA contemporary mystery sort of thing. My second one is like a speculative YA time travel sort of thing. And then there's this one, which is a romance with a speculative twist since they're stuck in the same day. And I always say that I want my author brand to be like, wait for the end, because my endings are what they are. And you are super into them, or sometimes you're like, wait, what? And so I think for me, my favorite part of every book I've written is the end and sort of that last scene and what the reveal is and kind of what I hope that you take away from the story. I am not a big, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of writing sort of that tie it up in a bow type of ending because I don't really think that's how life is. I think that we're sort of coming in and getting a snapshot of these characters' lives, and their lives should feel like they're continuing on after and like they fully existed before. So for me, I feel like I'm always building to the end in my brain of what I want to get to, and so that's pretty much, I would say, my favorite thing to execute, I think.
In my current book, the thing, a lot of the action takes place in 1930 in New York, and just I loved researching that period, especially gay New York at that time, which was and it was kind of in vogue in a weird way. You know, it was very complicated because it was illegal, but during Prohibition, New York was wild because it was everything was kind of illegal. And I spent a lot of time learning about different neighborhoods in New York and where the sort of centers of gravity of gay life were. They used very different words, which was very complicated for me when I was reading about it. And it made it very complicated to write about, but you know, fairies and pansies and these words that we wouldn't use today, but were very common at the time. And there was a huge drag culture in New York at the end of the 20s and the beginning of the 30s. And one of my favorite scenes in this current book is a big drag ball at Webster Hall, and just writing about these famous drag queens like Bert Savoy and Jean Mallon and people who, you know, by the way, these weren't just like events only for queer people to come to. Straight people came to like look at the gays. And it was sort of like they would bring in thousands of people, and some of these drag queens were super super famous, and they were friends with Mae West, and you know, like really really kind of just this excitement of the outlaw vibe of being gay, and the way that it was also the beginning of the Depression. So a lot of people didn't have a lot of money. So the creativity that went into a drag outfit, or like, where are you going to get feathers? Like, you got to go get them in Central Park because there's no shop selling feathers. I loved reading and researching and learning about that period of time because it's always been sort of this like mysterious, the gay life in the past has always been so mysterious to me in the specifics of it. And so being able to create sort of almost like a, I don't know, I guess like a set piece in the middle of the book that's really just sort of this explosive like celebration of drag during that period, and kind of playing with the way that people, that I imagine people would speak, because the words were different, but I also think that they probably didn't speak that differently to how we speak today. They just had different vocab. I don't know. Anyway, I love that sort of historical, the revelation of like how colorful and exciting that period was. So that was really cool.
I really love that. I wanted to ask you about that time period. Like, what drew you to the 1920s? Was it previous knowledge of it? Did you kind of discover it as you were writing this story? Like, what brought you to writing about that time period?
I have noticed a lot in the past few years, especially this kind of reaction against queer culture, saying like, "Oh, this is a newfangled thing. Like this is like we didn't have trans people when I was growing up." Like all this kind of stuff that people say that is just like so ridiculous. And I knew it was ridiculous, but I wanted to find evidence of that. And 1930 was, in the late 20s and early 30s, first of all, from a fashion perspective, I love it. I love the way that the looks. And have always been kind of a little obsessed with Mae West, Cole Porter, Gladys Bentley, some of these like famous people during that period who continue to be influential on our entertainment world now. I don't think current pop music would exist without Cole Porter having existed at one time. I think current comedy would be so different if Mae West had never lived. And so I was drawn to the personalities and the look of things. That was the magnet. And then when I got into it, I was really became interested in the just what life looked like and the politics around it and the economics and what New York City looked like and all that kind of stuff. So I guess my entry window was the personalities and the fashion, and then from there sort of opened up this kind of idea of the whole world for me.
I love that. All right. Okay, Charlene, I also had a question for you specifically about your story, um, which I want to lead into a bigger question for everybody else. You know, fate and destiny are big parts of the story, and these characters who keep reliving this day, it's like they keep meeting for a reason and they're trying to kind of sort through it. I wanted to ask, do you believe in fate? Like, what led you to use that time loop as a, a function in the story? And then as a bigger question for other people afterwards, I also wanted to ask if there's something that you want readers to take away from the story after you read it. Because I feel like, Charlene, this whole discussion about destiny and fate kind of also ties in with hope. And there's this overarching message. So I wanted to ask everybody if there's something that you hope readers take away after they read your book.
Yeah. I believe in fate more than anything else that exists. Like I am a huge believer in sort of destiny and that we're all sort of being cared for by a bigger thing, regardless of what you think that bigger thing is or what you call that bigger thing, what that energy is, if it's God, if it's, the universe, if it's energy forces, whatever. I believe there's something out there that's taking care of us. And for me, in writing this story, so Raquel kind of touched on it a fair bit, but I lost my dad unexpectedly at the end of 2022, which is the most transformative thing that I've ever had to deal with thus far in my life. And I started writing It's You Every Time a couple months after that. And I sort of just dumped every feeling I was having into those two characters to the point where I was literally I was like talking to my editor at one point and I was like, I don't know if this is a book or if it's just feelings. Like I've just sort of vomited into this book, like trying to process my own experience with grief. But one thing that was sort of very consistent for me when I was sort of in those deep, very raw moments of the initial impact of losing my dad was that it felt like my world had stopped and the world around me kept moving. And so this idea of this time loop sort of representing that and starting to be very symbolic of what that feels like. There's a line in the book that I completely forgot about, but a lot of readers who have been reading it and tagging me use it. And it is maybe that's what grief is, just a series of yesterdays forever. And for me,
Mhm.
that was very real. And it's,
Wow.
I don't want to say it's nice to see that other people can sort of relate to that, but I think again, is like what Raquel was saying, like it's the most universal and also like the most unique private thing you're potentially ever going to go through in this life. So, yeah, that's how that sort of came to be. And the time loop was obviously a very tropey thing, but at the same time, I think genuinely representative for me of what grief felt like. So, yeah, what grief feels like, I should say, because it doesn't go away.
Yeah, I wanted to relate again to that. It seems like our books have some tying themes in conversation that yeah, similarly mid 2021 I lost my mom unexpectedly, so very comparable. And about a month after that I had this like very unique experience of meeting some of my friends in New York for the first time and having this great time, and I had initially planned on canceling all of that because I was like, I can't go do this, like my mom is dead. And I remembered everyone around me being like, no, you have to still go do it, like you still need to do stuff. And I it didn't make sense, but I was also like, I could say this argument for the rest of my life of like, I can't go do this thing, like my mom is dead. And so part of with the question you were asking, Nicole, of like what you want our readers to maybe take away from our books is that one of the lessons these characters kind of have to get through is the idea that like they could have that excuse for the rest of their life of like, this person we loved is dead, like we cannot do anything, but you can't, like you have to find a way to take the good with the bad at the same time. And that I wanted the book to end on this note of like, it is always going to be sad because we are going to get to the end of the book and this young boy is still going to be dead. And like that different than the other books I'd published before meant that like no matter what we do, we are still ending with that being acknowledged. But it's important for teenagers to know that that doesn't mean that's like the end of the rest of your life, that the grief is always going to be there, but it's going to have different shapes and forms throughout your life. And you have to be, you can be holding its hand while still experiencing joy and experiencing good things, because it's weird, there's going to be incredibly mundane things and incredibly big things. So a lot of the book is kind of trying to get that point across to the characters, but also to any readers who maybe feel similarly, where it's like you can't feel guilty for still existing, because you're never going to be able to like deal with that if you can't find a way to just say like, okay, all of this and this person is gone, like that can't be a but this person is gone, it has to be joined together. So I kind of wanted to give that to characters of like, it's always, or to readers, like it's bad but it's there's good as well, like it's never, that's never going to be the only thing that exists now.
I'm very impressed with you all conveying your feelings in your books. And I, don't get me wrong, I do the same. Um, but it's interesting to learn your perspectives and how you come to writing, because I think I'm the opposite in that I find power in not in writing a frilly romance starring a trans character. And that's kind of the point in and of itself for me. Um, this character is, of course, going through tough things, because I think it would be insensitive to totally omit the issues that trans youth is happening right now in America. But just it's perfect timing, Nicole, to bring up this conversation, or rather this question, because that was kind of, I had to write a letter for early copies to go to media and influencers, and that was kind of the question of like, what do you hope readers take away? And hope is, of course, it, but I kind of said something along the lines of, I've tried my best to make the issue of this book be that this trans kid is stuck rooming with his ex. Oh, the horror. Someday this will be every trans kid's only problem, and I want you to escape into this world where that is the reality and you will be Charlie someday. And so it's emotional in an adjacent way. But not exact. So there's different angles that you can kind of come at these topics, I think, and still be very influential to kids.
Yeah, definitely. I think um, each of your stories is so important for different reasons. And I think your answers, even just hearing what you hope, people will take away, like it's so relevant to each one and it's so relevant to readers. Like needing the story that might be frilly or an escape. Like readers need that, needing to see the like representation of grief and knowing that life will go on. Like they need that too. So having kind of that duality, it's like they're equally as important and it's exciting. And I hope that readers do take away all those wonderful things from your books. There was a question in the chat that I wanted to ask. I know we talked about Pride Month. How has the response to your novels been? Have you encountered any unexpected challenges or pleasant surprises since, like of people receiving them? Like, kind of goes back into the question of like, has there been a moment that people have been pointing out that you didn't think about as much, while writing it that has been received really well?
For me, it's just a reminder that you just never know. You really never know. You create something and you feel like it's meaningful enough to share, and so you share it, and then the way people react to it, good, bad, somewhere in the middle, they seem to pick out things that I didn't expect them to find, or that I didn't remember, or that I didn't intend. And I don't know, there's always just such a fascinating dialogue between a writer and a reader, because you're both coming with history and points of view and complexity within yourself, and you're looking for different things and you're finding different things. And I don't know, it's just always so fascinating to me, because that I think is one of the distinctions between being a writer and being an author, is like as soon as you sign your name to something and you send it out into the world, you kind of it opens up these avenues of conversation that you would never expect, including here today. That is so like gratifying to just kind of be part of that world. It's always surprising. It's always surprising.
This answer is like vaguely meta-ish, but YA contemporary as a whole is kind of not in publishing's like shining spot right now. It's a lot of authors that I talk to have talked about this, that like YA contemporary is kind of a hard sell and hard pitch at this moment. And so I published this book last year, and for a while it was disheartening because it was a book that I cared about so much, spent so many years working on, and it came out in a time where I just felt like it was likely not going to have the same outreach to readers as it maybe would have if I had published it in like the 2010s, when I was like too busy being in high school. And so I've come to this weird, like, I guess my surprise for it now is that seeing that things have gotten even more difficult for the YA contemporary space after I sold this book in 2023, that I'm more grateful that it exists now, because I'm like, if I would have tried to publish it even a year later, try to sell it even a year later, it might not have happened. So I kind of had my own journey of like grieving that it maybe didn't have the exact like life and publication that I had like wanted for it, but that now it exists in the world. And it's been really cool getting to find people who like stumbled upon it way later than I had been really giving the like hard effort to try to show it to readers, and having just people connect to the story or connect to their own life experiences with relating to those characters was very cool for me, where I kind of had to remember like a book exists beyond the like 7 months after it comes out. And I feel like as authors, that's sometimes a hard thing for us to process, because you're so focused on the promotion for it during that period of time. And I think it helps that now I'm promoting my book that comes out in like 2 weeks. That's a zombie apocalypse book. So like very different than this, that it almost makes it a little lower stakes now. So that was kind of a surprise journey of like, okay, it like kind of did not get out there to as many people as I'd hoped it would. But then people started finding it after I kind of gave up on making an effort for it. But also I'm glad that it just like exists in the world, and that I could still at least kind of hope that other people reach it at some point and settle back and say it doesn't need to reach everybody right away. So that was it's like a little bit different because it's not quite about like other people's experience. It's more my experience with the book. But
do you feel like when you put a book out into the world, I know we kind of talked about this before we officially started the panel, but do you feel like the story still belongs to you and the characters belong to you, or do you feel like they belong to the world now once it's out?
I kind of think it's no longer my business. I used to joke when I first started publishing as a way to like cope with it. I basically said I wrote the book and that was my job. What people do with it after they check it out from the library or buy a copy, it's not my business. And we can make it each other's business if like they really enjoy it and want to reach out to me. But like if someone loves it, they hates it, like that is their experience with it. And I can't control that. So for me, it's like, it's still my book, but how someone experiences it is entirely their own. And it doesn't have to be like, we don't owe each other that necessarily of like making it be each other's problem. And it's cool if we can connect over it, but like we don't have to be involved in each other's experience, because there's a lot of people who read all of our books who we are never going to speak to in any way. And that's a very cool part of this job, but it's also a very weird thing to grasp.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. I make a rule for myself where I will only engage in comments or reviews that directly tag me. So even if I'm just like on Instagram, and it happens, like I'm on Instagram, I'm scrolling and I'll like see somebody included my book in a roundup, or, said they just finished reading it and it may be super nice, but I still like, I won't even like it because I think that readers reserve the right and deserve the right to be able to read and critique and have feelings about books without me as the author inserting myself, whether positively or because I'm sad you didn't like my book. So that's sort of a very helpful boundary I think I've sort of created for myself, which is like if I'm tagged, I will engage. And if I am not, it is not meant for me. I think in this day of social media, people understand how it works well enough that if they didn't tag me, there was never an assumption or an effort to make me see it. So I just try to really respect that.
I always think it's interesting hearing the perspective of the author once the book's out. So I appreciate you answering the question. We're nearing the end of our hour, but I wanted to ask one more kind of fun question about each of your books. If your book had a theme song or a soundtrack, what's like the first song you would put on it?
My book does
It's not
has a soundtrack.
love
Yeah,
it.
there's a playlist. So there are a lot, but there's one song that was not included that I actually think is a really good one. And now I can't fully remember the name of the guy who sings it. But it's I Love You Still. Oh, Taylor Shaw. Do you guys know who that is? It's like, so the
I
name
don't
of the
think so.
song is ABCDEFGHI, Love You Still. And I actually think it's very perfect for this, and it is not included in the playlist. So I consider that bonus content. So that's what I would say.
Love that. Always love some good bonus content.
I actually stole the title of my book from a song it, called Right Beside You by Sophie B. Hawkins, who is a singer, still is a singer, but she was pretty popular like in the early 90s, I guess, kind of thing. So look it up.
Perfect.
Yeah, my book title is also a song, which is something I usually don't answer just because I think it's funnier not to acknowledge it. And also that no one can accuse me of like trying to use that for promotion. So it is funny when I get asked this question that I pick something that is not the title because I think it's almost funnier to do that. And I didn't include this on like the playlist I made for all the characters, but Chinese Satellite by Phoebe Bridgers is a song that I feel like fits the book a lot. It's all about the main character the songwriter negotiating like that she has lost someone and kind of negotiating grief, and also saying she like wishes she could believe in something, but it's really hard for her to process like that there is a reason for all of this. So that was a song I definitely listened to throughout the process of writing it, and I feel like the characters can relate to a lot.
Not like you, Rocky, because this isn't a song title, but it is obviously a Vine title, and they were roommates. And people comment being like, "Oh my God, that's just like the Vine," and it's like, yeah. They think it's like brand new information. Every single one of them, all the thousands of comments, which I think is very cute, and I'm appreciative. But I also do have a playlist on Spotify that people save sometimes. And I'm someone, I don't know about you all, but my undergrad was in music composition, so I don't really hear lyrics. I just hear the music. So I'm the worst person to ask this question. But I think a lot of like Ricky Montgomery songs are in this playlist, so I'll just shout him out in general. You should check him out.
I love that. Now, thanks for the suggestions, because I'll go make a playlist and listen to them all. But yeah, I think that's the end of the time that we have. So I just want to thank you all again so much for coming and for indulging me in all of my questions. And you know, it's been so wonderful to meet you, and we're really appreciative. And for all of you who are watching, all of their books are available at the store. So if you haven't got copies yet, please come in and grab them, or you can get them on our website. The link is in our bio across all of our social media platforms. So yeah, I think that's everything. Thank you all so much for coming. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and good luck with all of your book promo going forward.
Thank you. And thank you for moderating.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for
Hopefully I did a decent job.
Great to
You did
meet you all.
good.
You did great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.